It's not a limited zero sum. Okay, you have a semester of ethnic studies, therefore you aren't going to learn, the traditional U.S. history courses. There's room to teach a fulsome, humanizing, not just history of the United States, but just contributions. And I think that's the difference between the ethnic studies pedagogy and traditional, that it is interdisciplinary.
And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys, gals, and non-binary pals to another episode of All the Above, the show that gives you an unstandardized take on education. I'm Jeffrey Garrett, one of your co-hosts, and I've been a middle and high school principal and a high school social studies teacher. And as always, I'm joined by...
What up, family? It's Manuel, your favorite teacher's favorite teacher. I'm a high school history teacher out here in the Los Angeles area. Wrapped up year 19, looking forward to year 20 in the classroom. And this here, of course, is All of the Above, your home for news and analysis of all matters pertaining to our wild, wild world of education. And Jeff, it is July, and I'm thinking anybody that's listening to this who is a classroom teacher or works with schools in some capacity, in the middle of July, those got to be your real diehard, dedicated educators, man. Because, there's two types of teachers, especially when it comes to classroom teachers. There's the ones that, last day of school, they turn in their keys, they, take their email off their phone or somehow, some way, make sure the work email doesn't pop up notifications over the summer, and they're gone. They're like totally tuned out for the entire summer. And then there's the ones who, despite their best intentions, just can't help but be part of conversations like the ones we have on the show. They just can't help to keep learning, keep thinking, and keep reflecting, and keep growing, even though they're not actively in school. So, Jeff, I think that latter group, that's who we have here as part of the AOTA family. Folks that continue to take time to reflect and learn and grow and think about how we can make this a better, more humanizing school system for everybody. So shout out to y'all on summer break, those of y'all who are on summer break. And I know you're not all on summer break, but those of you who are, shout out to y'all for being here for another episode. Jeff, how is your summer progressing?
Summer is progressing well, Manuel. I am fresh off of a very short but fulfilling vacation, chance to go back to, my home region of the country back in the Midwest and see some family and get to do just a little bit of travel, including seeing my grandmother, who is inching towards the age of 100. She is going to be 99 in the fall, and so beautiful, just wonderful family moment and a chance to make more intergenerational connections and all of that. So beautiful thing. And the summer, as folks may remember, is actually a very busy time for me. So I'm back at it on the grind, head first into the deep end. We got some good stuff getting cooked up for all of the school leaders and teacher leaders that I have the great privilege of working with here in Los Angeles. So good stuff happening, Manuel. Good stuff.
Dope. Sounds dope. And we have, for those of you who are like me, who are not having to work and grind during the summer because you don't make the big administrator bucks like a super duper principal leader man over here. You might have some time, some space for some very cool virtual conferences that are coming up. We got the Educolor Virtual Summit. Hit up educolor.org to learn about that. Great, uplifting, affirming space. And we also have the Conference to Restore Humanity, Human Restoration Project.org/conference. Both of those are coming up like real soon. So if you haven't registered yet or signed up for those, definitely go to those websites. For the Human Restoration Conference, Restoration Project, I don't know why I keep slipping on those terms. Code AOTA at checkout when you register. Save yourself a little bit of change and that also goes to support the show. So if you haven't registered yet, this might be the last full episode that we record before that conference. So get over there and do that. All right, Jeff, we have a full episode today. We have a super dope guest in the building. We have multiple headlines that we're going to look at and all that good stuff. So Jeff, can you break down for us what is on the agenda for today?
Well, Manuel, as usual, we got a good one for everybody and a official 105 episode streak fully intact of only having super dope guests here on the show. Today, we're going to be going deeper into a conversation that we've had a few times on the show, but with kind of a new angle. And that being the topic of ethnic studies and specifically in a state like California, and a region here like Los Angeles, where ethnic studies is about to become a high school graduation requirement, and more districts are already moving out front of that 2025 timeline of implementation, like Los Angeles Unified, the nation's second largest district. There's very real questions about how we prepare teachers to teach ethnic studies effectively, right? There are very few teacher prep programs around the country that offer ethnic studies credentialing. And frankly, there's not that many undergrads who are coming out of their college education with a deep, major and foundational course of study in ethnic studies as well. And so this is a real conundrum right now about how we actually implement this and roll this out and support and sustain really great ethnic studies practitioners. And so to help us explore that, we have a fantastic guest, Manuel, Dr. Jason Kim-Seda, who is an instructor at Cal State University, Los Angeles, is going to be joining us. He also has a long history as an educator, a teacher, a middle school humanities teacher, and also a middle school principal, but mostly working in independent schools, both on the East Coast and here in Los Angeles. So fascinating guest, fascinating topic for discussion today. Stick around, folks. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Yeah, sounds dope. Some more ethnic studies dopeness in the building. But up first, folks, of course, we have our Do Now, where we take a look at recent news and headlines in the world of education. Stay tuned. All right, folks. Now it's time for the Do Now. Let's take a look at news and headlines in the world of education, see what's going on out there in these education streets. Jeff, how are we going to do the Do Now today?
Well, Manuel, today in the spirit of summer school, because summer school is in full swing in most districts across the country. And as everyone who's ever had to go to summer school knows, one of the most important things about summer school, Manuel, is attendance. Because if you don't show up, right, then you can't get issued those credits. You cannot, actually earn what you need to earn as a result of being in summer school. So attendance is critical. Today, Manuel, we're going to do a roll call, see who's in the building.
All right, see who's in the building. I think a lot of districts, I believe mine is one of them, it's very strict attendance policies for summer school. Like if you miss, I don't know what the exact number is, but I know you can't really miss more than like 2 or 3 days without being disenrolled in that course. So yeah, man, we got to make sure folks are here. Folks are here for this learning. First name on the roster, on the roll call for today is the whole fam.
The whole fam.
The whole fam.
Okay. I mean, depending on whose fam we're talking about, Manuel, that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yes, my dad is one of 9 children, and my mom was one of 6. So there's a big family tree out there. So the whole fam is in the building. I like it. Let's do it.
Yeah. And in this case, we're talking about the teacher fam. You know what I'm saying? The teacher family, teachers across the nation. This is a story in regards to a survey of teachers, and they surveyed almost 1,000 teachers, so that's pretty big fam right there, to get a sense of how the teacher family is feeling about school safety issues and some of these reports that we're hearing about possibly arming teachers and what have you. So like most big fams, we see there are not all the family members are on the same page. Not all the family members have the same views on things. So this comes to us thanks to a report from EdWeek, thanks to Caitlin Peets. And she reports that according to a new survey by the RAND Corporation of nearly 1,000 randomly selected educators, teachers appear to be in agreement that bullying is the biggest safety concern at their schools, not active shooters. However, when it comes to teachers' views on carrying guns on campus in response to the threat of active shooters, the teacher perspective is decidedly mixed. According to the survey, 54% of teachers believe that educators carrying firearms would make schools less safe, while 20% say it would make schools safer. White teachers were more likely than black teachers to feel that teachers carrying firearms would make schools safer. And male teachers in rural schools were most likely to say that they would personally carry a firearm at school if allowed. Now, regardless of gender or race, roughly half of the teachers felt that physical security measures at their school site, such as ID badges, cameras, security staff, positively affected the school climate. Only 5% of teachers felt that their school's physical security measures had a negative effect on school climate. All told, about 550,000 of the country's 3 million K-12 teachers would choose to carry a firearm at school if allowed. 550,000 teachers, Jeff. That's an army of teachers with guns.
Yeah.
Maybe that's how we make things safer or something. So, Jeff, a survey of about 1,000 teachers, and teachers don't seem to really be on the same page about this whole guns at school debate. And, man, family dynamics, man. Family dynamics. Talk to us. What are your takeaways from this survey?
Yeah, okay. So family dynamics. I think it's a good analogy, actually, for how I feel about this. Because every family, Manuel, has like that one uncle who, like, he's in the family, but everyone's kind of like, hug the kids a little bit closer when he's around. So I just feel like I have to say, Manuel, at the front end of this discussion, that in the interest of speaking truth into the public media space, small as it may be, that we occupy, I just have to lead by saying the idea of arming teachers to solve the problem of mass shootings at schools in America is completely insane. Okay? There's not even anything about it that is mildly a good idea in any way. Okay? Not at all. Period. End of sentence. Now, a more, sort of empathetic interpretation of how to enter this discussion, Manuel, might be to say, especially in, more rural areas or places that actually have been harder hit by these kinds of acts of campus-based, mass shootings, I understand why people would feel somewhat helpless or somewhat, just afraid or powerless in the face of elected officials who refuse to do anything to solve this issue whatsoever, and in fact continue to exacerbate the issue by making more and more states and localities, open carry places, and lowering, not continuing the assault rifle ban, and allowing for younger and younger people to get weapons and no background checks and all that kind of stuff, right? So I understand that in that space, it forces people to think somewhat irrationally about how to create safe conditions, right? We just have to have a line in the sand somewhere, which is to say arming teachers is a bad idea. I will say, in as much as we're framing this as there's, it's a divided house, so to speak, among the educators about this, the fact that there's, more than half of teachers saying absolutely not, this will make schools less safe, and there's only, about a fifth of teachers saying that it would make schools more safe, I think actually suggests an important discrepancy here, right? That, like, in this kind of large scale polling, you generally don't see like 90% of people agreeing, on something, right? There's always like a chunk who are in the middle and that sort of thing. So I think what this actually says, though, that there's a more than 2-to-1 ratio of educators who say this is not a good thing, it makes us less safe, than those who say it makes us more safe. And a lot of those undecided folks, or folks who aren't sure, aren't saying, well, arm me and I would keep the school safe. It's these other teachers I am unsure about. They're, I think, debating the complexity of the issue. They're not saying I want to carry a gun in terms of what the data shows. So I think this is actually like okay in the sense that, like, the vast majority of educators are saying this. I do have questions, very deep questions, about the educators who say that arming teachers would make schools more safe, when I think the obvious, like unavoidable outcome of this is if teachers are armed in schools, they will eventually shoot the students that they are supposed to be educating and protecting. There's a 100% chance that eventually that's going to happen, right? That they're not only going to shoot the bad guy who comes onto campus, right? And whether that's a horrible accident or whether that's a teacher who flips out because they're stressed out and, and commits their own act of mass violence or whatever it is, right? Like, they're going to murder some kids. It's going to happen. And that's a terrible, terrible thing that we should not be increasing the odds of by arming teachers. So I'm shocked and appalled, and also like deep breaths, woosah. It's maybe not as bad as we think.
Family dynamics, man. That's what you got to do sometimes. Just take a deep breath and realize that, well, like it or not, we're all in this together, and we are trying to find a solution here together. Because, as you said, our political leaders, the last thing they want to do is take this challenge on head on and actually do something about gun violence. So there is that. I, for one, however, am shocked that there are differences in responses along racial lines. I'm shocked that the black teachers are more likely to say, yeah, we actually don't think guns will be a good idea. It's almost as if educators of color, teachers of color specifically, know that armed teachers somehow, some way is going to especially be a bad thing for students of color, because we've all seen videos of teachers flipping out and losing their cool and flipping out with a whole bunch of students of color around them. And the last thing we want is an armed teacher reaching for their firearm to deal with a quote unquote discipline problem. We definitely don't want to see that. And definitely, I, for one, agree with you. Armed teachers is just an insane idea. There's no way that would work out well. But especially, I don't want any guns in any teacher's hands around any black students, any students of color. We already have so much research out there, so much data to indicate that students of color, black students in particular, bear the brunt of a lot of harsh disciplinary action. And I could just imagine some teachers losing their cool and reaching towards the gun, thinking that like, oh, this will get the kid to calm down, or this will get the kid to take me serious. And of course, that would be a horrible thing to start seeing in our schools across the country. So yeah, there's that. I'm still, I don't know, that to me, 20%, you're right. Like it still shows that the majority of teachers know that this is a bad idea, but I still think that 20%, that's significant, man. That's like 1 out of every 5 teachers in our profession here. And I'm sure those 1 out of every 5 who believe that carrying guns would make schools safer aren't the type that would ever tune into our show in the first place. And it's just such a weird dynamic, because it's like, on the one hand, the nation doesn't trust teachers, and all of our, these teachers are woke, indoctrinating our kids, groomers, this and that. But on the other hand, oh yeah, let's give them guns. And this 20% of teachers, I could probably, I don't know, I don't want to make any assumptions, but I assume this 20% who think guns will make the school safer are also some of those teachers who think like, oh yeah, we do need to keep the CRT stuff out. We do need to keep this pride stuff out. I'm sure these teachers are more politically conservative and are the type of teachers that just aren't really on board with creating a more humanizing space. So our profession, like other massive groups and other professions and industries, we are a very diverse bunch with regards to thoughts and beliefs and approaches. And that 20%, man, that number is way too high. I don't know. That number is just way too high. So there's that.
Yeah. Yep. That number is most definitely way too high. You're also making me think, Manuel, just about the like ripple effect of this that is below the super escalation of now teachers firing a gun on a campus, right? So like all the kinds of conflict laden disciplinary scenarios that you're talking about would currently fall, in the way that schools practice into that space, right? So there's a fight on campus and it looks really dangerous, and you're breaking it up, or 2 students are in a hallway like screaming at each other and escalating and like, clearly ramping up, and it could get out of control, or a student's having some sort of a mental breakdown and crying and screaming and uncontrollably, and like introducing into all those equations the threat that a teacher, an educator, might shoot you or might shoot someone because of this, right? Like, what's the corrosive effect of introducing that into the cultural, ecosphere, if I just made up a phrase there, of school, right? What does that do to relationships between adults and between adults and kids in that kind of an environment? What does that do to trust between adults and students, right? And so this is a terrible, it's such a bad idea, Manuel. It's like, I can't really bad. It's hard to even explain
not good.
Why it's so bad. It's just terrible. It's terrible.
Just terrible, let alone like 0% chance of working. Like, you can look at any of the mass shootings that we've had, and there's too many to even cover right now. I can't really imagine any one of them going very differently if there were like a handful of armed teachers on campus. I mean, we saw Uvalde, we saw all those armed police officers, so many of them. And it's just the dynamics of school shootings are so complex. Like just an armed teacher is not going to be able to really stop it. There will be more harm done than good for sure. Like for sure.
Yep. 100%.
Well, all right, Jeff. That was the first story. We're talking about the family, talking about the teacher family specifically. Who we got on the roll call next?
Well, Manuel, next up we have James. James is here today.
James. Oh, there's
Yes.
a lot of Jameses out there. A lot of James. We could be talking about James Harden. We're just talking about school shootings, and James Harden is known for firing up a lot of shots in a game. Too many, and sometimes with little positive effect, especially if this is the playoffs. But this is not a sports podcast, so we can't be talking about that, James. What education, James, might we be talking about here? I don't know, Jeff. What we got? First
of all, I just have to say James Harden, my second least favorite NBA player of all time. So just acknowledging my hateration.
So the people want to know who's number one, Jeff. You can't
Chris
say something
Paul,
like that.
Chris
and,
Paul,
not tell us number one.
CP3, out of here,
Okay.
Chris Paul. No championships for you. So back to the question at hand. This James Manuel is James Madison. You may be familiar with.
Yeah, James Madison. Okay. Constitution in the building. Okay,
That's
Bill
right.
of Rights. This must be a
Yes.
story about upholding the Bill of Rights and upholding, freedom of speech and we did just talk about weapons and of course, separation of church and state, upholding our rights that are enshrined in the Constitution. All right,
Yeah.
Let's do it, Jeff.
Yeah. That's you would think that's exactly what we're talking about, especially since the people that push for the kind of insanity we're about to talk about, Manuel, love to beat their chest to talk about the Constitution and the Founding Fathers and the great wisdom of the white men who brought us Jesus and freedom and all that good stuff.
All that.
Yes, exactly. So let's get into this here. Yes, we are talking a bit indirectly about James Madison, primary author of the U.S. Constitution, including the very first of the amendments, Manuel, the one that in theory our right-wing friends should love even more than the Second Amendment, that being the First Amendment. So let's get into this, Manuel. We have a story today coming out of Education Week by Mark Walsh. And in June, the state of Oklahoma approved the nation's first Catholic charter school, which lays the groundwork for a seismic boost in direct government aid to religious schools. The school, which was proposed by the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Oklahoma City and the Diocese of Tulsa, was approved by a 3-2 vote by the Oklahoma statewide Virtual Charter School Board. Quote, "It's hard to think of a clearer violation of the religious freedom of Oklahoma taxpayers and public school families than the state establishing the nation's first religious public charter school," said Rachel Laser, the president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. The state board received competing legal advice to consider during its decision about the question before them. The current attorney general has advised that there is a, quote, "clear directive under the state constitution that the public schools be operated free from sectarian control, and state statute requiring that the publicly funded charter schools be non-sectarian." However, an advisory legal opinion issued last year by a different state attorney general noted that the recent U.S. Supreme Court decisions authorizing the inclusion of religious schools in choice programs, such as tax credits for scholarship donations and tuition assistance, meant that the state likely would have to approve the application for religiously affiliated charter schools. In their application, the Catholic Diocese argued that the charter schools in Oklahoma are, quote, "not state actors," end quote, or acting with government authority. That is a potentially critical question as to whether charter schools are public schools, and one that the Supreme Court might take up soon in a charter school case coming out of North Carolina. Governor Kevin Sitt said, quote, "This is a win for religious liberty and education freedom in our great state. With the nation watching, our state showed that we will not stand for religious discrimination," end quote. Manuel, tell me what you think about this, man.
They will not stand for religious discrimination, Jeff.
Yes.
That's just, I can't help but laugh at that because I'm thinking about, so will this person support, schools founded through other religions? Would this person stand up for schools
the
that
Jihadist
are Muslim
Academy
or Jewish?
of Tulsa? Are they down for that? Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
So yeah, this actually reminds me of when I was a kid and when we would have like a substitute teacher. And of course, this still happens today, I'm sure. Kids get excited sometimes when there's a substitute because they know that despite all the expectations set by their regular teacher, they know that sometimes when there's a substitute, they can get away with things that they normally couldn't get away with their normal teacher. And we're seeing that in some of these court cases, some of these attempts to go ahead and push the boundaries because a lot of folks know, like, oh, okay, there's a lot of Trump-appointed judges out there. We have a conservative majority of the Supreme Court. Like, maybe we could get away with this if we just like talk about it crazy enough. Maybe we could actually get away with having a charter school that's a Catholic school. Maybe this is the time because, like, who's in charge anymore? Like, everything's just wonky now. So why not try? Why not try? So on the one hand, I got to give them their props for trying something as outlandish as saying that a Catholic charter school doesn't count as a public school, even though it'd be funded by public dollars, by public resources. That's some audacity right there, for sure. It also makes me think about how when we talk about public schools versus charter schools, like charter folks always come out and say like, oh, wait, no, hold up. Charters are public schools. We are public schools. And charter school proponents have long disliked the casting of like traditional public schools versus charter schools because charter schools are funded by the public, and a lot of charter proponents don't like being cast as if they're like some kind of like private school or independent school, even though many charters, of course, have engaged in practices similar to practices that we see from private schools, from independent schools, such as not serving certain populations, certainly not serving special ed students and our most marginalized students to the same degree as other students. Yeah, this is obviously this is just flat out wrong, having a Catholic school and that says like it's not a public school because it's not beholden to state authority, even though it's a charter school, meaning the money comes from the state. Like, we're not stupid, but they might be counting on the fact that either some of our justices that have been appointed over the last, however many years, some of our federal judges who've been appointed might just be stupid, or more importantly, don't really care about facts, don't really care about how things are supposed to go. If it's something with religion, and in this case, it's a Catholic school, maybe they're betting on the fact that a lot of these folks, even though they know it would be in violation of the First Amendment, would go ahead and support it because it's furthering religion into our public education system and further dismantling our traditional public education system as we know it. So got to give them some credit. It's also laughable, but it's also just like, I don't know, it's just where we are. So I am not surprised.
Yeah, no, I am not surprised either, Manuel, although I kind of didn't see it coming this quickly. I thought there might be a little
Now's the time
of a delay, but now is definitely the time. They're like Ron DeSantis talking crazy in Florida, fighting Disney. Like, now's the time to create a Catholic public school in Oklahoma. So, here's the thing, Manuel. The folks on the right who love to push for this sort of thing, right? Who love to create the twisted, mental gymnastics, intellectual pretzel shaping kind of exercise where they say the fact that, people who are religious don't get public funding for their religious activities is a form of discrimination. And that's a ridiculous idea on its face, right? Also, these are the same people who claim to be quote unquote originalists when it comes to the Constitution, right? Now, originalism as an idea is also racist and ridiculous and horrible because originally you and I were chattel and would have been worth 3/5 of a human being. So out of here with your originalism, okay? But let's just entertain their originalist mythology for a moment and say, okay, what does the original text, or at least the original 10 amendments of text to the Constitution say about this very issue, Manuel? And it's extremely clear. Okay, now I am not looking at a copy of the Constitution right now, Manuel, but I think I've got this one down, or pretty close. With the First Amendment, it goes something like, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. Okay? And then it goes on to talk about, you know, the other components of the First Amendment, freedom of speech and the right to redress of grievances and all that stuff. But it's like pretty much as literal as it gets to say, like, the government can't establish a religion. And what could be more clearly an exercise of establishing religion than creating a school that teaches young people the religion? Like, that's the most establishing a religion thing you can do, or at least right at the top of the list, right? So, like, this is wild. And also, Manuel, I'm really caught by the fact that this mirrors the exact same kind of, sort of double speak logic that many things that happen in the corporate sphere are starting to now intrude into the education space. And what I mean by that is corporations have used the legal apparatus to become people in the eyes of the law, so they can speak in elections by donating unregulated sums of money to corrupt our political candidates, right? So the court has said corporations are people, right? They have a right to speech under the Constitution. But as soon as corporations do something wrong, well, they're not people. They're a certain type of crafted legal entity that has limits on its liability, and that you can't actually, nail down any person to hold accountable for these actions, right? It's just, it gets mired in endless litigation, and maybe you get a settlement if you're lucky, but like there's no one to actually hold accountable, right? Like legally, they avoid accountability for all of the harm and crimes that they commit, while at the same time claiming the exact same rights as individuals in our society. And this feels a little bit to me like what they're doing with religious schools here, right? Because this argument that they are private and therefore they can do whatever they want religiously should be seen in theory as extremely dangerous to the charter school movement, right? Because as you said, they've invested so much in the rhetoric around them being public schools, and that's why they should receive state funding. That's why they should receive the benefits of being public schools and the treatment, the assumed benevolence of being public schools. But now we have a sect of them saying, no, we're not public, we're private, therefore we can do whatever we want religiously. But you can bet, Manuel, that when it comes back to it, they're going to argue both positions at the same time, just like corporations do in this right-wing legal sphere, right? Like, no, we're corporations. No, we're people with rights. No, we're corporations. We can't be held accountable. It's going to be, we're private. We can do whatever we want religiously. No, we're public. Therefore, you can't hold us accountable the way you would hold a private school accountable, right? And I think that's the dynamic we're gonna see here, Manuel. It would not surprise me at all if this goes to the Supreme Court and if the court rules in favor of these folks.
Which is why they're trying.
Yeah.
Strike while the iron's hot. This is the time to flood the courts with all sorts of attempts at basically trying to do everything that you would have done before when things were functioning somewhat the way like they're drawn up to, in terms of like, making sure we're keeping public dollars out of religious schools and this and that. But now it's like anything goes. Substitute teachers in charge. Hell, you might get away with it right now. You might get away with it. Why not try? So we'll see. We shall see. And I'm sure this will be far from the last wonky idea put out there. And as always, folks, we'll keep an eye out for stories like this and keep you abreast of the news and developments here, because it's a wild, wild world of education for sure. But folks, that about does it for today's Do Now. That about does it for today's or this week's look at news and headlines in the world of education. Up next, we have a seminar discussion specifically about building up our ability and capacity as teachers, as schools, as districts to offer authentic, quality, high quality ethnic studies to every student, especially here in California where the graduation requirement takes effect very soon, but also outside of California where areas are considering implementing ethnic studies in their own districts or their own locales. All right, so seminar up next. Stay tuned.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to All the Above. We really appreciate you. And as you know, All the Above is a small operation. It's just me and just Manuel, that's it. We have no sponsorships, which means we are totally dependent on our amazing audience to help support the show. So here's what you can do. go to our website, which is aotashow.com/support. That's aotashow.com/support. There you can find links to everything you can do to support the show. You find all the links to every platform that we're on where you can like, subscribe, follow. Make sure you share our show with your whole network. Also, you can donate there. We are on Venmo. We're on Cash App, and most importantly, you can find the link to our Anchor page where you can become a monthly patron. Even a small donation once a month will make a huge difference in helping us continue to produce the show. Lastly, you can find there the link to get your flyest, best, latest, all the above show merch. Okay, all you gotta do is go to aotashow.com/support. Thanks, enjoy the rest of the show. All right, folks, welcome to today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us. And we are super excited to dig into today's topic of conversation. It's one very close to the hearts of both Manuel and myself as social studies teachers, and Manuel as current ethnic studies teacher at his high school. And that is really getting to this issue of how do we train and support practitioners to do ethnic studies instruction well? Here in the state of California, as you would know if you've been listening to recent episodes on the show, we have a mandate coming, a requirement coming for high school graduation in 2025 statewide for all students to earn an ethnic studies credit as a part of their course of study at the high school level. Many districts around the state are also moving forward with that requirement more quickly or already have one in place. And we have this issue of where do we find great ethnic studies teachers, or how do we build and cultivate great ethnic studies teachers from our existing ranks? And to help us explore that topic today, we have Dr. Jason Kim-Seda with us. Welcome, Dr. Kim-Seda, to All the Above.
Thank you. Excited to be here and be part of the conversation. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, folks, let me tell you a little bit more about our guest. Dr. Jason Kim-Seda is a researcher, instructor, and program designer for the College of Education at Cal State University, Los Angeles, where his areas of focus include expanding university-school partnerships and building capacity of ethnic studies teacher teams. He is one of the folks who've helped design the new Sal Castro Academy for urban teacher leaders for the upcoming academic year, which will do just that. Dr. Kim-Seda taught for 23 years in independent schools in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and here in the Los Angeles area, where he taught middle school humanities. As an educational leader, he's held a variety of positions, including middle school director, dean of students, instructional dean, and mentor teacher. Dr. Kim-Seda earned his EDD from a small technical school here in Los Angeles. I'm not sure if Manuel has heard of it. I think it's called the University of California at Los Angeles, something like that. Manuel, are you familiar?
Am I familiar with the world's #1 public university, UCLA? Jeff, yes. Yes, of course. The whole world's familiar, Jeff. #1.
Yes, the great UCLA. And shout out to all the folks over at the Graduate School of Education. They're doing amazing work. Welcome, Dr. Kim-Seda, to the show. It is an honor to have you here with us today. And I'm going to kick it over to Manuel for our first question.
Yeah, we got Dr. Kim-Seda in the building, ethnic studies dopeness in the building. Dr. Kim-Seda, thank you so much for taking time out to be here with us on All of the Above, especially to talk about this really innovative program that you and your colleagues at Cal State University, Los Angeles have, which is the Sal Castro Academy for Urban Teacher Leaders. Now, we want to hear about this academy. It sounds like it's going to be doing some dope work and helping teachers in the Los Angeles area, helping support them with the implementation of good, solid, quality ethnic studies teaching in their school, in their schools. And it's named after Sal Castro, who's a real titan in education out here in the Los Angeles area, but some folks might not be very familiar with him. So can you talk to us a bit about the vision of your program? And for those who aren't very familiar with Sal Castro, can you share a little bit about who he was and why you've named the program after him?
Sure. You know, I will. Thanks for having me on, and thank you for the intro. I wasn't one of the founding persons who created the program, because I joined Cal State LA to work in 2022, the beginning of 2022. but I've been brought on to help think about redesign and remodeling, and how could the Cal State LA be more responsive and collaborate more with districts surrounding the university, and one of the opportunities that came up with my colleagues at the college was through the Sal Castro Academy. How can we take that vision? So I'll talk about that for a moment. So this Academy for Urban Teacher Leaders was created a few years ago by some folks at the College of Education, honoring the work of Sal Castro, who, as you mentioned, was a titan in the area as an educator, as an activist. He's an alum of Cal State LA, very involved in kind of East Side Los Angeles schools as a teacher for 30 plus years. Activist. He's often known for the 1968 walkouts, student walkouts or blowouts that were protesting, a series of protests looking for more equitable resources, representation, meeting the needs of Mexican American high school students and college students who also joined in to help that fight, to fight for that equity. And often his name is put on that one movement for those who know his name a little bit, but he had been an activist and working with, he developed the Chicano Youth Leadership Academy. I forgot the exact name, where he kind of worked as mentoring young students, Chicano high school and college students out in Malibu at this Camp Hess Kramer. So he had invested he had this youth advocacy activist mentality even before the blowouts were on the horizon. And that's the inspiration for the Sal Castro Academy. Continuing in his legacy, again, some educators were like, we'd like to start something in his honor to develop urban teacher leaders who would like to train the next generation of community activists, of students who are really engaged in the community, who want to do projects that are inspired by issues in the community. So there were a few kind of guiding principles for the program to examine the legacy of Sal Castro and the relevance of his work in anti-racist teacher activism, to identify advocacy strategies for equity and justice, to analyze the transformative potential of education projects using YPAR, youth participatory action research, ethnic studies, community-based activism, and also to engage in critical self-reflection and strategies of self-care and understanding the importance of kind of one's identity and connection as it relates to, I know a word that you often use because I listen to your podcast, in terms of humanizing education. It's teacher humanized, students humanized, community humanized. And I think it's kind of in that spirit that the Academy was brought together. And perhaps down the road, I'll talk a little bit more about the specific iteration for the academic year 23-24 that I was brought into, or at least my research that I started at Cal State LA led to a kind of redesign or reimagining of the program for next year.
Yeah. Dr. Kim-Seda, I really appreciate you giving that context. And as someone who's a relatively new transplant to Los Angeles 9 years ago now, it was fascinating to move here and be sort of immediately deeply immersed in the local history and context of kind of educational civil rights organizing and social justice organizing, and to have come from the other side of the country where, there was so little information about the amazing work and history that had happened here in Los Angeles. It was great to sort of open my eyes and horizons, jumping into this context here. And so I would definitely just encourage folks out there who maybe heard your words there about Sal Castro to do some Googling and learn a little bit more. It is a fascinating history and just an amazing chapter of struggle and perseverance in the face of a lot of educational injustice that folks might enjoy learning more about. That said, really interested in the Sal Castro Academy that you all are rolling out, and there's an interesting emphasis here on ethnic studies pedagogy as opposed to ethnic studies curriculum, which often I think maybe dominates more of the headlines. Wondering if you can kind of share with us a bit about the distinction between those two things and also its relevance in the kind of larger topic of the merits and controversies around ethnic studies implementation here.
All right. So just a short, simple question to answer there. But I'm going to take a step back a moment before I get to that, kind of how I funneled down to thinking with my colleagues about building capacity for ethnic studies teaching teams. So again, I was brought on to the university January of 2022. And my initial charge from the director of their EDD program and the dean of the College of Education at the time was do some outreach, do an environmental scan of districts in the area, reach out to teachers, principals, district administrators, professors from colleges other than UCLA, and talk to just find out what is the current landscape in terms of professional development needs, particularly for school leaders supporting teachers, because that's my niche. I mean, you read my bio, but the niche that I found that I really enjoyed and why I was really engaged in this research was I was a mentor teacher for several years and just worked with new teachers formally and informally, and kind of working with them and developing professional development that from someone who still had the foot teaching with new teachers, like that was something that got me really excited. I did a little stint as a principal for a while, and that wasn't really too much for me. I know, Jeff, you probably have more of the stamina, discipline, or maybe what's the word, kind of disposition, perhaps to do it. I know you've been a school leader in many ways, but that niche of kind of reaching out and talking to folks about professional development needs, that led my research. And there were a lot of things coming kind of as folks were moving to the next stage or even thinking about post-pandemic to endemic, like what were some of the needs, and what kind of came out was, there was social emotional development of students, which was clear that, kind of the impact of the pandemic lingering in that area, being more culturally responsive as teachers and as school leaders. But one thing that also came up was ethnic studies. As you mentioned at the top, this requirement for it to be provided as an elective is rolling out, and then graduation is rolling out. I mean, we're in 2023. Manuel, correct me if I'm wrong, is it 2029 or 2030? Is it a graduation requirement?
So every school has to be offering it during the school year of 2025, but then the class of 2030 is going to be the first high school class that has to have completed an ethnic studies course in order to graduate.
Yeah. So 2023, that's coming up real soon. And so it was just, there were some districts I reached out to that they had a proposal for the program like 2018, 2019, pandemic hit. And then implementation of their initial ethnic studies elective, mostly housed as a history or social studies course, rolled out 2020, 2021. That's when we shifted to, we're in the pandemic. So the teaching online, lack of access to kind of community and like a teaching team, I think really hindered the rollout in some ways. And I don't say that because I was teaching during the pandemic, the first year and a half or two of it. That was hard. So I don't want to take anything away from the efforts that teachers put in to do the best they could, because I think they get a lot of flack for something they had to do. But it's not an ideal way to roll out. And I'm getting to that pedagogy piece, such kind of a intensive and community-based and dynamic course in its ideal when I think it's rolled out. So my research it kind of pointed to how can we build capacity for ethnic studies teaching teams as they're in their current rollout phase, thinking about the elective requirement, how can they scale up training teachers, developing curriculum, but how can they do that with fidelity as opposed to with urgency. I get reminded often, Jason, focus on the important, not the urgent. But those are melding a little bit as 2025 and 2030 come along. So the focus of next year's Sal Castro Academy, there are 5 pillars of focus. The overarching one is building capacity for ethnic studies teaching teams. The second area that I heard a lot was advocacy, both internally and externally, in terms of policy and political context. And I think we're going to get to that in a later question. Kind of an overview of ethnic studies pedagogies and how do you weigh that versus curriculum? That's the current question. Then thinking about, okay, now that we have this, how can we, engage civically? How can we develop youth participatory action research projects? And I know, Manuel, you've done that for several years, and you just had a presentation with your high school students. And then kind of how does culturally responsive school leadership weave into kind of the developing of a ethnic studies teaching team? So that was a build-up. But to pedagogy, your question was why the focus on pedagogy over curriculum? And again, I'm going to couch this that I was trained as a history and social studies teacher. So I haven't taken an ethnic studies course, so I'm not an expert, but I spoke to a lot of folks who are experts in the field at the secondary level, at the higher ed level, and kind of infuse some of that learning. And I think even through my EDD education, kind of had some of the mindset infused within me to think about how could my pedagogy look differently. But I think one of the concerns I heard, there's a focus on curriculum and content. So it's almost, I don't know if it's the cart before the horse, but there's a big focus on, okay, we need the curriculum. We need to get our 9th grade semester-long course, which has some problematic nature to it because it's just squishing in, okay, let's teach about the core 4 groups in 4 or 5 months and get through it. So there's a concern that it's, especially if there might be teachers who are not ethnic studies teachers, or trained in the discipline, that it might become a multicultural class. Okay, here's 4 isolated units. Let's talk about some key points in history of Black Americans and Latinx Americans and Asian Americans and Native Americans. Let's make sure we hit those points and get through the course and meet the requirement. But if that becomes if there's too much focus on curriculum, I think it misses the pedagogy piece. And I'm just gonna actually pulled out a few quotes from my interviews just to kind of highlight kind of what some people are thinking about. Because I asked them, what is ethnic studies to you? And this is from a secondary teacher. It's interdisciplinary. It's built to highlight marginalized voices. We do it through the social science and English courses and arts courses, but it's, thinking critically, using culturally sustaining pedagogy, and talking openly about liberation. Someone else said, a university professor, when students learn ethnic studies, they learn to examine in a certain way, and they go back to their classes with questions and a different lens in which to engage in their other learning. Another professor down from San Diego State said, to think like a ethnic studies teacher, it's not just inquiry based, which is good practice for lots of teachers, but it's to even question the questions. It's transdisciplinary. It's questioning how race, identity, and power impact whatever content you may present, and where these elements are significant in this novel, in this event, who is empowered, who is marginalized. So it's, I get excited thinking about it because I was slowly kind of changing my teaching a little bit from like a history humanities teacher to thinking more about the questions and the impact of race, gender, class, orientation, power, disenfranchisement. And curriculum and content is important, and learning kind of that local-based, community-based curriculum. And I think that's part of the pedagogy as well, but it's can't get lost in the content, because I think it's about who's teaching in terms of kind of identity of teacher, who is being taught and who's contributing in terms of students and elevating their voices, kind of the who of the community, and then how that mixes together to do the what. So it's kind of the who informing the how, informing the what, as opposed to, when I grew up kind of teaching my first year, I was happy, like, give me the what so I can just get through my first year. Give me the content, give me the curriculum. I'll figure out the how later. I mean, not that much later, but it's like, and it's really, I think it's thinking about the who is teaching, how they're teaching, who's elevated and what voices. Sorry if that was a little rambly, but I just, it was such a rich question. But if you want to follow up on any of those pieces, and again, I'm with Manuel, who's been teaching this discipline for, almost coming on 20 years, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, more or less. Yeah, I mean, like you, I was a trained history, social science teacher for a very long time, and it was a process of developing this lens, developing this approach to pedagogy that you just spelled out. I mean, I think you just spelled out in a lot of ways how complex this is right now in this moment. For years, folks have been organizing for an ethnic studies requirement, grad requirement, and California took that groundbreaking step. But now we have some really tough questions about like what it looks like and how to do it right. Because as you mentioned, it's not just about curriculum and content. It's also about the approach and who's teaching it and how it's being taught. Is one semester in the ninth grade the best approach? I agree with you that it's not the best approach, but it's what we're going to be seeing. So like with this 2025 deadline for it being available as an elective, with that looming, and with the 2030 deadline looming for those graduates to have successfully passed the ethics studies course in order to graduate high school, we have some tough questions about how do we take this great promising idea and make it a reality in schools across California. So we're wondering what you and your colleagues have seen as some of the strengths of implementation efforts so far, as you've seen them across LA or across California, and what are some areas of real need and growth in order to make sure we have high quality ethnic studies in all of our secondary schools?
Yeah, good question. And again, when thinking about the questions, I kind of I went back through the interviews and conversations that I had, and kind of was really thinking about, I want to highlight the words of the people who are on the ground doing this work, and them sharing, what are some of the strengths that are working right now? What are some of the challenges? And I think going back to the first question, kind of the vision of the newest iteration of the Sal Castro Academy is to be honest that, there are some strengths and good work going on right now. But one of the challenges is isolation, or there are pockets of good work, and there needs to be some bringing together of folks who are doing the good work, who have been doing ethnic studies for coming up on a decade now, to interact with folks who are doing ethnic studies for 2 or 3 years, sharing best practices. So that was part of the vision, thinking about bringing folks out of isolation and together to do some of this learning together. So that gets to, some of the good, some of the strengths. And I highlighted, for the newest Sal Castro Academy, what I wanted to do was reach out to folks who have been doing the work for a while, doing it successfully. They've definitely experienced their ups and downs. One of those places, if you look at Santa Ana Unified School District, I think they had their first course in 2015. But I think there was based on conversations with folks there was some initial, pushback from the community, from other teachers, from the board. But a woman who was really instrumental in that initial course really kind of stayed the course, worked on developing some advocacy from within and from outside of the district to kind of boost and elevate ethnic studies. And, that work, that groundwork and that visioning. And, one of my interviewees had said, it's really important right now with ethnic studies, you need to manage the narrative more than you need to manage the lessons. And I think Santa Ana is an example of where they've managed the narrative as they've managed the lessons and the pedagogy. They have a team now at their district level. They have 3 ethnic studies mentor teachers. I'm not sure if they call them TOSAs, but they have someone working in social studies, ELA, and visual and performing arts, mentoring teachers around the district as they're implementing their programs. And I think, Santa Ana has a really good model in place. And I've been in conversation with bringing some of those teachers to do some of the presenting at Sal Castro Academy. I have a colleague of mine from UCLA who's been doing years of really good work in Culver City High School. She was involved also, I think, in developing the model curriculum. Manuel might know her, Kimberly Young.
Yeah.
But she's doing a lot of good work, just kind of grassroots. I know that can be thrown around, but I think she's really kind of bringing her team along and developing these teacher inquiry groups where it's not just training the teachers, but she also has, I think, 2 of her assistant principals they're learning side by side. And I think that's one of the strengths of some of these programs is this side by side learning of the teachers and the administrators, so that, one of the challenges right now is just, I think, administrators in some districts understanding amidst everything they're juggling, like the investment, the time, the kind of energy to develop authentic ethnic studies curriculum and courses and connections with kids. It's a lot of effort. It's different from me being my history teacher and all right, let me go Civil War, Reconstruction. I'll talk a little bit about nativism, and then FDR, maybe hit the World Wars and get to the Civil Rights Movement. That I can kind of sing through that, and it became rote for me after a while. But the investments, anyway. So Culver City doing these teacher inquiry groups are great. I think some really good work going on. So I've talked to Kim about possibly helping out. Camino Nuevo Charter Network and Ron Espiritu is doing some really good work. They've been, so I think it's, and I'm noticing, I've talked to folks at El Rancho Unified. They've had courses since 2014. But I'm seeing if there's a combo of teachers and administrators who are aligned and working together and supporting each other. And if there are administrators who are managing that narrative and doing that advocacy, but also creating some space and time for folks to meet and plan and develop a unified vision. I think one of your questions was also, what's one of the challenges? Right, that was one of the questions, I think, to implementation. I think, again, going to isolation, like you can have a district that I spoke to that has 5 big comprehensive high schools, 2,000 plus students, but there's only 1 ethnic studies teacher on that campus. And just finding the time, for those 5 teachers from 5 different schools to come together and plan. And in one district, I think those teachers get together once a month. And to me, that doesn't seem like enough time. I know teachers are busy and whatnot, but I think there needs to be that visioning and that time to meet, and also to have some even implementation of the course. And for an administrator to, maybe they aren't trained in ethnic studies, but if they learn more about it, can contribute more to creating that space and that vision, for that vision to develop, and for that even and implementation with fidelity to happen. I think that's one of the challenges. It's interesting. I heard from a handful of teachers, they're like, we really need to bring the school counselors on board as well in terms of the training. So that kind of stood out to me as one of those like unexpected findings or conversation pieces, because as they're guiding students into courses and figuring out when they're going to take what, like some folks were hoping their guidance counselors would have a better understanding of what ethnic studies is, as opposed to, oh, you can take this elective and have it be a checkbox. So they didn't want it to become a checkbox. So it's really kind of, when I talk about building capacity of ethnic studies teaching team, what I was hearing was teachers need to be supported, and almost this wraparound support, teachers from other schools, counselors, assistant principals of instruction, or the sub superintendent of instruction and curriculum. Like, all these folks kind of need to be involved in implementing the program. If you are just like, having a teacher like, here's a curriculum, like, I really need you to teach 2 sections of ethnic studies next year. I mean, it's going to happen. But that's going to be one of the big challenges, is how are new teachers being trained, and who's being trained, who's doing the training. Because it's really, I'm thinking of another, I'm just going to read one more quote and then I'll stop for a moment and see if you have follow up. This other professor said, how do you shift from being a history teacher to being a more inquiry-based ethnic studies teacher? It's not just a curriculum shift, it's a philosophical shift in the way you think about teaching and students. And he also said this, he said, we can't PD our way through this. Even though I'm putting together in a way like a PD program, but he's like, it's more of it's a heart, it's a philosophical issue. Like, it's almost like an approach to teaching. And it's not simply like, you have a new section of this. So it's an intricate, complicated web, but there are a lot of people doing a lot of good work, and you just need to bring folks together. Yeah.
Dr. Kim-Seda, we've just got time for one final question here for you today. And I think, bringing you here to talk about this issue would probably be remiss to not speak at least a little bit about the kind of larger context of this conversation and the sort of national landscape within which we find ourselves, which is the sort of escalating vitriol and right-wing attacks against against things like ethnic studies, but even just more basic stuff like book bans and opposition to teaching truthful history and that sort of thing. And you also are somewhat unique among our guests on the show in that you have had a long career as an educator in an independent school context. And so we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, insofar as the kind of national landscape and backlash that we're seeing about teaching truth and teaching ethnic studies, what has that been like for independent school educators, and what role can independent schools play in helping to advance the sort of righteous agenda of teaching truth in our schools?
Yeah, these are great questions. I'm just going to go back to one thing kind of in general, that one quote that really stood out to me from someone, you need to manage the narrative just as much as the lessons and get out in front of it. I was just thinking like the importance of messaging, communication, being out in front, being authentic, like, hey, talk to us, talk to the teachers, talk to the folks doing the work. This is what ethnic studies is, or this is what I'm teaching the kids, as opposed to having these perceptions that, and lumping together ethnic studies is disruptive grooming books, is critical race theory, is just saying like white people are bad. It's just, I think the narrative is very simple. It comes from some fear, and it comes from some ignorance and not knowing. So if the messaging can be proactive, like, this is what it is. It's not a limited zero sum. Okay, you have a semester of ethnic studies, therefore you aren't going to learn, the traditional U.S. history courses. There's room to teach a fulsome, humanizing, not just history of the United States, but just contributions. And I think that's the difference between the ethnic studies pedagogy and traditional, that it is interdisciplinary. So some of the places that are working to infuse it, and ELA and VAPA, are trying to do that work. But it's, probably folks like you, Jeff, who have had to kind of step out there and just be the advocate, and sometimes maybe the punching bag when you get pushback from parents, like staying the course, managing that narrative as much as you can, finding the support where you can. So that was just kind of just in general about the current kind of political context around it and it being politicized. It's sometimes that argument, some of the argument is just centering white people. I think ethnic studies seeks to just let's center marginalized folks whose histories and contributions to society have not been uplifted. And, there are plenty of studies that are out there in terms of like learning in a diverse environment or learning culturally responsive curriculum. Like it benefits all kids, white kids, Black kids, brown kids, Asian kids, and learning from teachers of different races and ethnicities benefits all kids, benefits white kids. So anyway, that would be my tangent on that. From the independent school world, it's interesting. I stepped away from the classroom in 2021. That was after 23 years. I needed just a little break to find something different. I'm sure it didn't help the convergence of the pandemic, finishing my EDD. I was just kind of burnt out. I think there are folks doing good work in different pockets in terms of developing humanizing programs, curriculum, working for inclusivity and belonging. And that was the nature of my dissertation research, looking at what are the experience of BIPOC teachers in independent schools in terms of feeling a sense of belonging and support from leaders. I feel like kind of DEI initiatives, particularly in independent schools, again, there are pockets of places that are doing some good work, but whether it's independent schools or other companies or other schools, like placing one person in a position like handle our DEI is kind of that's very short-sighted, and it's setting up someone for burnout and failure. But I was looking back, the founding of a lot of these independent schools, especially in California, if you look, I looked up like 30 schools, and 15 or so of them were founded mid-1930s to mid-1960s. That's here in California. And I know Manuel and Jeff, you've talked about it as well, like Los Angeles County is seen as this bastion of blueness and democracy. But, it's not just about blue, red, Democrat, Republican, but it's there are folks who want their separate schools, and all these independent schools popping up right around, Mendez versus Westminster, Brown versus Board of Education. It's not a coincidence. So I think there's that entrenched culture and kind of predominantly white independent schools that has developed. And while the statistics in some schools may look like, we have 38% students of color and 25% teachers of color, that doesn't get at kind of the infused culture of a place and the difficulty of, let's say, even implementing an ethnic studies course at an independent school, because we want the APs, we got to meet the A through G requirements to get to the UCs. Kids are kind of focused on that. So I think there are a lot of good people I interviewed and talked to from my dissertation who are doing some of this work, but it's a challenge as well. But I think there could be an opportunity with a little bit of the freedom in independent schools from to develop programming and perhaps curriculum that is innovative outside of kind of because it's an independent school. So I think there is some opportunity there. But, I was thinking about this question. I hadn't quite wrapped my head around it. But the pushback is, intense. My last year where I taught, I took over because we had a teacher leave a civics elective called Race, Class, and Gender. And I took some of my UCLA learning. I'm like, I'm going to approach this really from identity focus. First few weeks, I'm going to talk to kids about intersectionality, community culture wealth, standpoint theory, even critical race theory without naming it as such, because, but, race is an important part of our society and how things are dictated. And, but also talking about what the kids are bringing in terms of their own identity and their family histories to the table and how we are learning. And it was and then we took, pieces of US history to kind of study and piece together. And kind of the through line of the year was, because it was during the pandemic, was to look at kind of public health history impacts over the year. And then at the time, it was like the initial rollout of the first vaccines. So it's kind of like looking at history through community, race, access, class, but kind of through a public health lens. And it was just the most enjoyable course to create and have kids engage. But I had emails from students who weren't even in the class and parents there's one, they said I was anti-American, the way I was teaching. Kid and the parents weren't even in the class. So I think that pushback is probably everywhere, public, private, independent, Catholic schools, whatever it may be. So there's going to need to be some, again, I think part of it, going back to Sal Castro Academy and some of the good work that you all are doing, and we're trying to do at Cal State LA, and just all of your guests that you bring on, staying connected as a community who, I forgot what your t-shirts say, but nothing but the truth, but just like this, staying together and keeping each other strong, because the culture wars that are infusing it are going to continue to come, and I think they're going to get much more intense over the next, between now and 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your perspective today with us, Dr. Jason Kim-Seda, researcher and contributor to the development of the Sal Castro Academy for Urban Teacher Leaders at California State University, Los Angeles. Really a pleasure to have you on the show with us today. So thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you both. I really appreciate it. Sorry, if I was rambling at points, but I could talk about these questions, this for hours, because I'm just I feel like I'm trying to be a contributor to the conversation and a supporter. And it's really exciting. I know some of the stuff I shared was, a little a downer, but that's the reality. But I think amidst that, there's just a lot of strength, a lot of really good work and commitment kind of in the line of Sal Castro. And he took a lot of political, financial, and professional hits, and even was put in jail a few times for his support and his activism. And, that might be the cost. But that's an inspiration, like him kind of staying to that course for 40 years and sticking to it as an educator and a supporter of youth in Los Angeles. So again, I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Absolutely. Folks, that is it for today's seminar. Thanks so much for joining us. Definitely stick around for our Class Dismissed coming up next. All right, folks, we've come to that time in the episode where we like to pause, reflect a little bit, give some flowers and some love to folks out there doing great things in the world of education. It's our Class Dismissed. Today we have a fascinating story with maybe one of my all-time favorite quotes in it, coming out of the state of Connecticut, and a exciting partnership between Yale University and some prisons out there, where someone in the article said, I got my Yale ID or my jail ID and my Yale ID. And I just like that. So, Manuel, what do we got today?
Yeah, man, we got this by way of the Associated Press, thanks to some reporting from Pat Eaton Robb. And yeah, man, Yale in jail. So this is about a commencement that happened about a month ago now. And, you know, it was commencement season. In this case, we had some incarcerated folks earning some diplomas here. So in a groundbreaking initiative, a group of inmates at a Connecticut prison received college degrees from Yale University. So the inmates completed a rigorous program called the Prison Education Initiative, which is a collaboration between Yale and the McDougall-Walker Correctional Institution. The program offers incarcerated folks the opportunity to pursue higher education and earn a bachelor's degree while serving their sentences. And the recent graduation ceremony celebrated the achievements of these incarcerated folks who obtained degrees in humanities, social sciences, and the arts, Jeff. So one of, I think, a growing number of efforts out there to help incarcerated folks not only access education, but continue to pursue higher education. And of course, there's all kinds of research that shows the benefits of folks having those opportunities there. So yeah, shout out to all those folks who got some Yale degrees, it sounds like. So yeah, man, great stuff.
Yeah, it's really great. I feel like, you know, of all the wrongs in our society, Manuel, one of the most important things that can be done is investing in the education and the future and the hopes of folks who have found themselves under the boot of our carceral system in this country. So shout out to the good folks at Yale and the University of New Hampshire who are making that program happen. And of course, big congrats to the graduates of the program, and best of luck in the next steps in your life as a formerly incarcerated person. We hope for great things for you for sure. So folks, that's it for today's episode. But we have a couple quick things we would love you to take action on. One of them is to follow up on what our guest for today's seminar said. Dr. Jason Kim-Seda from Cal State LA mentioned that you can get your own Teach the Truth, All the Above shirt. The way you do that is you go to our website, which is aotashow.com/support, or you can just go to aotashow.com and there's a little button at the top that says support. There you can scroll down and see all the swag items that you can purchase, including your own Teach the Truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth AOTA shirt, and help support the show. Really appreciate you for doing that. The last thing is the good people at the Human Restoration Project are putting on their summer conference, the Conference to Restore Humanity. It's going to be a fascinating, humanizing learning experience. You should definitely go check it out. All you have to do is go to humanrestorationproject.org/conference. That's humanrestorationproject.org/conference. There, you can register for the conference and use the code at checkout, AOTA. That's AOTA, like all the above. You'll get $25 off. We'll get some support for the show. It's a win-win situation and a great learning experience for everybody out there looking to recharge the batteries over the summer. So definitely take advantage of that. And folks, thanks for sticking with us all the way to the end. You are the AOTA family we love and appreciate you very much. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah.